This video is for all the sore losers out there. Everybody who's been picked last in pickup basketball, everybody who didn't win their softball tournament in middle school. If you have been on the unfortunate side of competition, this one's for you guys. This one for you. In all seriousness, this video is a second in a three-part video series about competition and cooperation and how I think that competition has been negatively impacting society over the course of history. The last video that I just posted was about how they both relate to alienation. This video is going to be about how competition and inequality have affected us. And the next and last video in the series is going to be about conflict. Inequality, what is inequality? Inequality is one of those things that we're kind of just taught to live with, taken for granted, honestly. We're taught that some people are better at others at certain things. So those people are going to excel at things that other people won't. Humans have inherent differences, and you can't force everybody to be the same. That's ridiculous. That's authoritarian. Now, I'm not here in this video to argue against the principle that people are different and that some people are going to excel at things that others aren't. That's not what I'm here to do. And I certainly don't hold some authoritarian worldview that we should somehow make everybody the same. I don't know how that would work, and I don't know why you'd want that to work. The point of this video is to point out how inequality and how it relates to competition has negatively impacted everybody in our society, those at the bottom end and those at the top end too. In this video, I'm essentially arguing against the concept of economic inequality itself, not just the idea that people are different. Now, when I'm talking about inequality, I mean it in a very broad economic sense. Again, I'm not arguing against the idea that some people are better at things than other people. That's not what I'm trying to do. When I say inequality, I'm talking about the unequal and inequitable distribution of wealth across different groups of society. I'm talking about classes, essentially, the existence of class. Now, it's never usually argued that competition doesn't entail inequality, but it's a necessary point to establish. Inequality is just a natural consequence of competition. It's also been said that we should mitigate inequality. People don't usually argue against that. Now, people have different ideas about how we mitigate it. Some people might believe that we need social policies like welfare that will help mitigate the effects of inequality or make it easier to rise on the economic ladder. And other people think that it might be best to let the market essentially determine the roles that people end up in society. But it usually isn't argued that inequality isn't something that's always going to exist. Now, as long as competition exists, there's always going to be losers and winners. There's always going to be people who don't win out in the end. There's going to be people who have more. That's inherent to the quality of competition. There's always going to be a candidate that doesn't get hired, a business that doesn't take off. People have a finite amount of wealth to put towards the things that they need and that they want. For example, a pro arm wrestler is never going to make as much as LeBron James or any other NBA basketball player, simply because arm wrestling isn't as popular as basketball is. People put their money towards the things that they find interesting. And as a result, the things that people don't find interesting aren't going to make as much money. The pro arm wrestlers are not getting the big bucks like LeBron James is. They're always competing for the attention of somebody under capitalism because people, again, put their money towards the things that they find interesting. So you have to capture the attention of somebody, whether it be the consumer as a business owner or entrepreneur, or if you're a worker, you're competing for the interests of an employer. In order for one person to succeed, somebody else has to fail. That's just the nature of competition. And this is intuitively correct, right? Like capitalism couldn't function. Society couldn't function if everybody were wealthy capitalists. If everybody was a business owner, there'd be no workers to maintain the businesses. Capitalists make their money largely off the backs of people that significantly have a lot less than them. And that's simply a fact of competition. Again, in order for one person to succeed, somebody else has to fail. This is why you see capitalists trying to form monopolies or lobby to repeal policies that would make them harder to form. It's because they have an incentive to make sure that they are the ones that succeed and that other people don't have as much as them. They thrive off the fact that people don't have the means to produce for themselves and they have to resort to capitalists to work for money in order to get the basic necessities of life, like food and water and housing. They have to resort to the capitalists because they are the ones who have the means to produce. They have the money to give them in order to live. But this is kind of where the problem starts to come in. I mean, in a highly competitive society like ours, where we literally have to fight for our spots in society, we kind of believe that we deserve the spots that we have. I mean, in a lot of cases, like I said in my free will video, it feels like we have free will, like we did something on our own. So we believe that we deserve the places that we've ended up in society. But the fact of the matter is, your success under capitalism is due completely to factors outside your control, primarily how well what you do satisfies consumer demands. Like I said earlier, the arm wrestlers, the professional arm wrestlers, they don't satisfy consumer demands like an NBA basketball player does. So their position in society reflects that they don't make as much as an NBA basketball player does. If people don't value what you do, then you simply won't be successful. People won't put their money towards the thing that you're offering. But is this really ethical? Is this how we want to live? Is it really ethical that a teacher, someone who likes teaching, is likely going to make less than somebody who owns a popular restaurant franchise simply because people might actively value the food more? I don't think so. It's not something that you can control. It's not like at the end of the day, you can just choose something else to be interested in. Like I said in my free will video, you don't choose your interests, and you certainly don't choose the fact that people don't value what you're doing as much as something else. So why should something as trivial and uncontrollable as how much people value your services determine your access to the basic necessities of life? And I say trivial because it has nothing to do with your actual contributions to society. There are companies that pollute and actively hurt people and the earth that will make far more in a day than a teacher might make in a lifetime. That's ridiculous. A society where your access to money is determined completely by the values of other people, how much other people value what you do, that inherently restricts freedom. It's an imposition of the values of the majority onto the tiniest minority that there is, the individual. You're essentially saying that people have to live their lives based off the values of other people, because what else are you going to do? If you're doing something that people don't value, then you're obviously not going to be raking in money, and then you won't have the money needed for the basic necessities of life. You have to live your life basically every day catering to the needs of the consumer. Since money determines your access to basically everything in our society, your ability to pursue your own idea of a good life is determined entirely by the values of other people. Is this really freedom, where you have to live your life, again, catering to other people's values? Would a better society not be one where you could live your life catering to your own desires, doing what you want to do, and not have to worry about, oh, am I satisfying a demand that's going to determine essentially if I'm able to live? I think that that would be a better society, quite frankly. And as a result, the people at the bottom are necessarily going to have less freedom than the people at the top. And it's not because of anything that's within their control. Like I said in my free will video, you don't choose your interests. You can't say, oh, today I'm going to be interested in basketball, and tomorrow I'm actually not going to like basketball. I'm going to like entrepreneurship. You don't choose to do that. And that's why there's excuses of, oh, some people deserve less because they took a risk or a bad life choice that they made. It doesn't mean anything to me because you don't control your actions. Saying I deserve less because of an action I took is like saying I deserve less because I have brown hair. It's not like I control either of those things. I still deserve the basic necessities of life, just like any other human being on this planet, regardless of any action I took, especially because I don't control those actions. I mean, oftentimes it's more than just a matter of deserving less than somebody else. It's a matter of deserving enough to live. I mean, how often do you see people justifying the conditions of the poor and the homeless by saying, oh, they made a poor life or economic decision, so they're just going to have to live out the consequences of their actions. Making a poor life or economic decision does not mean that you don't deserve to live. I mean, this is just a consequence of inequality. We become so distant from the people that live at the bottom, that we try to justify the horrible conditions that they have to live under. And we don't even bat an eye at the suffering that they endure every single day. And again, with this language of deserving, so many people think that the poor deserve their place at the bottom at the economic ladder because maybe they made a poor life decision or they didn't work hard enough. But as a result, we kind of tend to disrespect the people that keep our society running, our minimum wage workers, our construction workers, our waiters and waitresses. We tend to idolize and thank the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks. But how often do you see people regularly appreciating the garbage can collectors of our society? We teach kids at a young age, maybe not in school, but by implication of this highly competitive society, we teach kids that they should want to own the world rather than to help it. I mean, the disrespect that so many people treat our manual and low paid workers with would never even be a thought in the presence of somebody wealthy. I know that there are many people ready to throw a milkshake back at a drive-through worker's face if they got their order wrong. But no matter what people might say, if you were in front of Jeff Bezos, would you treat him with the same disrespect that you were ready to treat the low-paid workers with? Absolutely not. I mean, this underappreciation for the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum bleeds out into blatant disdain for the people that live at the bottom. I mean, how often do you see people dismissing claims that we should help out these people by saying, oh, success is easy, you just have to work hard. Now, systemic racism is a concept for a whole nother video, but saying that people deserve their place at the bottom or that they just fail to work hard completely neglects the long-term effects of practices like slavery, Jim Crow, racial gerrymandering, redlining, employment discrimination, and so much more. And this doesn't just go for Black people. There are a ton of systemic and environmental factors that go into why some people at the bottom aren't able to rise up the economic spectrum. Like, it's not simply a matter of not working hard enough. Saying that they just don't work hard enough is beyond reductive and just historically inaccurate. I think a prime example of this exact same inequality and its negative psychological impacts on marginalized groups of people can be readily observed in something that people have called imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome is simply described as involving feelings of self-doubt and personal competence that persist despite your education, experience, and accomplishments. It basically means that if you come from a lower social or economic standpoint, like if you were in a lower corporate position and you rise to a higher corporate position that's dominated primarily by people that don't necessarily look like you might not feel like you belong there or that you deserve your place in that space, despite all the qualifications that allow you to be there. This sounds exactly like something that's a natural consequence of society that's built upon and necessitates the existence of inequality. I mean, imagine being someone that's lived basically their whole life at the bottom end of the social and economic ladder, and they see all the praise that the people at the top get and all the idols that exist there and how those people are treated with respect. And they're never treated like you are, essentially. You look inwardly and you see all the disdain and the disrespect that the people in your community get. And then you see how it contrasts to the people at the top. And now imagine that you're finally able to rise out of your circumstances into the communities that you looked up at and idolized for so long. How often do you think you're going to feel like you belong in that space, that you deserve to be there, despite all the qualifications that allow you to be there in the first place? I mean, you've witnessed and experienced firsthand all the disrespect that you get, the claims of laziness, or that you don't deserve to be in the higher end of the economic spectrum because you made a poor life decision. You look inwardly and you see all that disrespect, and then you see how that contrasts to the new position that you find yourself in. That's why so many people don't feel like they belong in positions that they find themselves in later on in life. That's why you see imposter syndrome so much among women and Black people. It's just a natural consequence of inequality. This is the problem with a society that views money and capital as the peak of human achievement and of happiness and success. We measure worth essentially through wealth rather than contributions to society and how well you contribute to the common good. And how do you think this is going to contribute to the mental stability of the people at the bottom end of the spectrum? I mean, they have to fight for the same recognition and social esteem that the people at the top get to enjoy without a sweat off their brow. They don't have the same source of pride that the people at the top get to enjoy regularly. As a result of constantly being labeled as lazy and not hardworking enough, these people constantly just lose social esteem. Now, the negative effects of inequality on the people at the bottom are obvious and readily observable, but don't go thinking that the people at the top, the winners, aren't also hurt by inequality. Now, the wealthy, they can't just have their wealth. They have to believe that they deserve it. And not only deserve it, but deserve it in comparison to somebody else. In this, they tend to forget about the people at the bottom, the people that got them there in the first place. You can't rise completely on your own. You have to have help from other people and largely from the people at the bottom. For example, the roads that keep your business going, the supply chains that take the resources from the extraction site to your factories, they weren't built by you, they were built by other people. You can't claim ownership of that. And even the idea of being self-made is not only figuratively, but literally incoherent because it takes two people to make a human being. And this isn't like a pedantic talking point. I mean, you completely owe your success to the fact that you were born in the first place. And not only that, but the fact that you're not mute and you're able to communicate with other people. You can't claim ownership over that fact. That's completely luck, essentially. The spirit of entrepreneurship that got you where you are is just not something that you can take ownership of. But again, the feeling of entrepreneurship is not an interest that you just conjured up on your own. It's something that you just developed through your environment or the reading or whatever it was. And it's not something that you can really claim ownership of. It's just there. However, even the journey to the top is far from painless for many, many people. And we need to challenge the idea that wealth corresponds one-to-one with happiness. In a society where we're constantly fighting to be at the top, people have a natural fear of being at the bottom, whether it be from social humiliation or starvation itself. People just obviously don't want to be at the bottom. And as a result, we kind of want our kids to not want to be at the bottom too. I mean, that's a natural consequence. And as a result, we trap our youngest in a hyper competitive gauntlet that negatively impacts them for the rest of their life. I mean, Michael J. Sandel, in his book, The Tyranny of Meritocracy, described it as a high stress, anxiety ridden, sleep deprived gauntlet of AP courses, test prep tutoring, sports training, dance and music lessons, and there's so much more. I mean, so many people know the feeling of being one of those kids who's constantly wanting to be an overachiever and having to be at the top. We tell our kids that they'll have to work hard basically their entire lives so that they don't have to end up on the streets. And we teach them this so that we can teach them to be intellectuals and politicians and eager employees for well-paying corporations. Some of these we obviously need, but we don't teach kids that it's dignified to be among the workers that keep our society running, like our construction workers and our trade skill workers. So many schools just don't even bother with trade skills anymore. And I'm sure many people know the feeling of their family being disappointed when they tell them that they're going through a trade school route rather than getting a liberal arts education or a research education. Now, obviously, we're not going to want our children to be on the bottom end of the economic ladder. Like, obviously, rightfully so, parents aren't going to want their children to be poor. But as a result of this highly competitive culture that we normalized, there's a massive push on our children to outperform their peers and to climb to the top at a very young age. And it's reflected in their habits. I mean, for example, among 6 to 8-year-olds from the years 1981 to 1997, playtime dropped 25% and homework over doubled. Even among wealthy and privileged college students, they're experiencing record high levels of anxiety and depression, and they're 2.5 more times as likely than the normal population to experience and suffer from substance abuse and dependence. More people now die from suicide than from homicide. This is ridiculous. And this isn't just some coincidence. I mean, everybody not even including our 8-year-olds and our college students, have so much pressure on them to outperform and to outcompete everybody else from this highly competitive culture that we've normalized. Nobody wants to be at the bottom. I mean, the consequences of being at the bottom, like I said earlier, are humiliation and starvation. As a result, you kind of tend to self-impose a perfectionism on yourself so that you can outperform other people, and you become a workhorse that has to be at the top. Like Michael Sandel also said in his book, The Tyranny of Meritocracy, among those that land on the top, it induces a debilitating perfectionism and a meritocratic hubris that struggles to conceal a fragile self-esteem. This idea that happiness maps one-to-one perfectly with wealth needs to be shattered. You don't necessarily live a fulfilling life just because you have money. This ruthless climb to the top, this highly competitive society that we've normalized, is killing people essentially, and it leaves people bruised and depressed. People wouldn't have this fear of rejection and of being at the bottom if not for the inequality that instills this fear in them. Inequality hurts everybody involved, not just the people that end up on the bottom. The result of inequality: humiliation and a loss of self-esteem among those who land at the bottom, and hubris and anxiety among those at the top. These two ideas, humiliation among those at the bottom and hubris among those at the top, are completely at odds with human prosperity and the common good. How can we come together if we're looking down upon those who land at the bottom and we're constantly worried about being at the bottom ourselves? I mean, this inequality completely breeds not only a fear of being at the bottom end of the spectrum, but also a disdain for those who already are. I mean, this inequality is inherently divisive. You can easily see how it creates a distinction between the haves and the have-nots. You can also easily see how it denigrates empathy by making us believe that we deserve our spots and therefore become less inclined to help those at the bottom because they earned where they are. And we can't just view this lack of appreciation and disdain, this blatant disrespect for the people at the bottom, as just some fringe example of humans being vain. No, it comes from inequality itself. Human beings are inherently social, but it does come with a natural and inherent bias for the people that we consider to be within our in-groups. We internalize biases about ourselves and other people based on what we think to be our in-groups. You can easily see how inequality exploits this inherent tendency and allows harmful ideas and harmful stereotypes to take hold, like the people at the bottom deserving their places and them being lazy and not hardworking, and how we'll idolize the people who end up at the top. Challenging the ideas that inequality creates is a matter of challenging inequality itself. We shouldn't have to worry about being placed on this grand economic spectrum of inequality that determines our access to the basic necessities of life. In a society based on cooperation and mutual aid without class distinctions, this blatant disrespect for the people at the bottom wouldn't be able to exist because there wouldn't be any people at the bottom in the first place. People should be able to live freely in commonality without having to worry about if they're appeasing consumer demands in every action that they take. People should be able to have access to the basic necessities of life just as much as any other person out there. Thank you guys again for watching this video. That just about wraps it up. Again, this is the second video of a 3-part video series about competition versus cooperation and how I believe that competition is overall worse for society than cooperation. The next video will be about conflict. I'll see you guys once I post that video. Meanwhile, see you later.